Hello, gorgeous. How are you? I'm in Italy now. I'm here for the next couple of months at my house in the mountains, just south of Abruzzo, and it's cold. The sun's been out today, so not a bad day for staying in and doing a podcast. Too cold to sit outside, really. And I do like to work outdoors if I can, but not today. Well, I want to talk about fear today just for 10 or 12 minutes, and I want to ask you a really big question. What are you afraid of? That is a big question, isn't it? It's one we don't ask ourselves very often, and it's one we don't usually feel all that comfortable about when someone else asks us. Even if they're asking for the right reasons with a view to helping us deal with something, it can feel a bit judgmental, can't it? And we don't always tend to respond well to being judged, especially if it feels negative. It's hard to react positively to someone we feel is viewing us negatively, isn't it? Even if they are trying to help. But the truth is, a great many of people's actions or inactions are driven by fear. Whether it's fear of being judged, fear of failing, fear of letting someone down, fear of being uncomfortable, or even fear of success, it's the driving factor behind so much of what we do or don't do. It's a normal human emotion. It's a primeval reaction to feeling unsafe. We've all had that from the year dot. Even Cro-Magnon man had things to be afraid of. Early human beings were afraid of natural forces like thunder and lightning. They believed that spirits could help or harm them while they were vulnerable in some way, like being ill or being pregnant or out in the world hunting. So fear is an ancient part of our wiring as we've evolved as human beings. Animals have it too. It's part of the existential blueprint all living species have for keeping ourselves safe. But what is it that we need to feel safe from? That's the really big question. As new creatures on Earth, we used to run and hide or stand and fight in the face of danger, perceived vulnerability. But the days when we felt compelled to run from weather or hostile beasts we didn't understand are gone. In the modern world, the vulnerability we seek to avoid usually manifests a lot more subtly in the way that we make decisions or not to do or say something that could potentially leave us feeling unsafe in some way, vulnerable. Most of what we're afraid of now is a man-made construct, largely of our own perception. It's our own man-made construct. If we don't feel safe somewhere, at work or in a relationship or out in the world in general, or even sometimes with our own thoughts, it's because we're genetically programmed with an avoidance response to feeling vulnerable. And I'm not talking specifically about mortal danger. Of course, that's always an issue. It's always something we need to be mindful of. But sometimes a simple argument with a partner, a colleague, or a friend can leave us feeling intensely vulnerable and exposed. We'll avoid that wherever possible because we need to feel as comfortable as possible as we go about our daily lives, and we can't feel comfortable if we feel vulnerable or unsafe. It probably doesn't occur to you as you're doing a million different things that there are things you are deeply afraid of, perhaps even subconsciously, and not really in full awareness, even if you did stop and think about it. But maybe they are things that get in the way of so much of what you do or don't say in life, and indeed from actually living your best life. Fears typically come from past experience. For me, one of my greatest fears is being seen as a nuisance, and that comes from being an only child of parents who always saw me as that. If I had a question, it was always answered with a fair degree of impatience, and I once found out that my mother had described me to an acquaintance who asked after me that I was a bloody nuisance. All that did was reinforce what I'd already felt. Nearly 60 years later, I'm still afraid of making a nuisance of myself with someone, and even though I know where that fear comes from, it's still there as an integral part of who I have become. I can't pretend it isn't there. It's a fear that stops me from pushing myself as far as I probably should if I want to be really successful. But at least I know about it and I can kind of work to overcome that. But you have to have the knowledge to take action. But I grew up in quite a dysfunctional household where negative emotions were freely expressed, but nobody really knew how to express positive ones. I know a lot of women of my generation, and men too, can relate to having parents who never really had a lot of time for us for different reasons. It may have been because there was so much else, or so many siblings or other distractions demanding their attention at the time, or maybe it was simply because they were people who didn't function well in the world and didn't have the interest or the skills to treat us as if what we had to say was important. I know that resonates with many, and it's just one example of how we can carry forward fear from a long time past that somehow became an integral part of who we are and how we function, the messages we tell ourselves about the world and our place in it. Fear of disappointing a parent or being censured for having done so is another example. I had a client a few years ago who was allowing her children to walk all over her because she didn't want to be the same kind of disciplinarian her parents had been with her. She had big emotional scars from that, but she didn't realize how the fear it had instilled with her had manifested. She didn't want to scar her own children, but the lack of boundaries within the household had created different problems for the whole family. One of my dearest friends is in her mid-60s, but she still feels like she shouldn't travel abroad anywhere alone because a husband she had back in her 20s told her, among many other mean and nasty things, that she couldn't find her way out of a paper bag, so she'd never have a hope of getting from an airport to a hotel anywhere. She does it, but before she goes anywhere on her own, she always doubts herself more than she would if that seed had never been planted. Every time she gets on a plane, she thinks about the prospect of getting lost and feeling vulnerable as a result. For a long time, she didn't travel at all, but now that she understands why she always talked herself out of it, she can adjust and carry on with her dream of seeing the world. But that little internal voice of fear and self-doubt is still inside her, and she has to push back on it every time. So like it or not, the experiences we've had shape us, often in ways we're not even fully aware of. But depending on how we were at the time we had them, how vulnerable we might have been on different levels about different things, the experiences we had were often internalized in ways that have created subconscious fears that prevent us from fulfilling our true potential. If you were to sit and analyze exactly what it is that holds you back in some area of your life, would you be surprised if some of what you discovered was a bit silly? I've done this. At times when I've taken an avoidance route and it's resulted in a negative outcome, I've asked myself what the hell I was so scared of, and not saying yes or no to something or making a decision. I sometimes ended up feeling a bit pathetic and stupid for the reasons I'd used to avoid it. Sometimes people stay in bad relationships or in jobs or other situations because of the fear of what life might feel like for them if they didn't. Others don't take a chance on a great opportunity because they worry about what might go wrong. Yet more will stay quiet and still because they fear being judged for speaking or acting. None of this is abnormal, but it does help us a lot if we can think about a couple of things. Firstly, where does that fear come from? What happened in our lives that created our compulsion to avoid doing, being, or saying something? And what impact has that had on our ability to be true to ourselves? And in failing to be true to ourselves, where has that taken us or left us in life? What price are we paying in holding on to that fear and letting it drive us? Consider the wonderful tool of the cost-benefit analysis. This was one of the best little nuggets I've ever learned when it came to making a decision, taking a chance, or leaving an opportunity on the table. It's swift and it's effective, and it comes down to another little set of questions, ones I force myself to be honest about. Then with the answers I come up with, I know whether or not the fear I have around something is justified. The first question is, what's the worst thing that could happen if I do or say this, and can I live with it? Second question, what's the best thing that could happen if I do or say this, and how great would that feel? If the outcome is something I can be comfortable about, that's my starting point. If it isn't, it's where I stop. But if a potential outcome is something I can live with at worst and be happy about at best, it no longer needs to be a fear. As much as we're sometimes our own worst enemy, we can also give ourselves the best boost possible in claiming the life we deserve. It's all a matter of how we identify what holds us back and what we decide to do about it. I've spoken recently to several women who are trying to work out whether to take a leap of faith. One is thinking about leaving her marriage. Two are trying to decide whether to give up well-paying jobs to start businesses. One is thinking of selling her house and relocating to a completely different part of the country. And another is weighing up her options to make a very big choice to hopefully improve her health. These women are all faced with big decisions, and they're all currently confronting or avoiding their fears about the outcome. Some will make a decision, hopefully the right one, but some won't make a decision at all because the fear will win. So where are you in all this? What are you worried about as the outcome of the decisions you do or don't make? Even the small decisions that fear controls the outcome of can have a huge impact on how you live your life. Fear is an important ally when it comes to survival and comfort, but maybe, just maybe, it's also your greatest demon in preventing you from living the life you truly want and deserve to live. You do deserve the best life. We all do. And sometimes that means taking a chance or making a radical change. If you can unpack the fear you feel around that, look at where that comes from, you'll be able to understand whether it's a tool of survival and comfort or whether it is simply an outdated coping strategy that no longer serves you but holds you back instead from something truly wonderful. It's your choice. Nobody can make it for you. Just make sure that the choices you make are not the result of a groundless or insubstantial fear. The great thing about courage is that we all have more of it than we think. Trusting our gut can get us past that big barrier of fear. And sometimes that's the only key we need to find to unlock that door to a much, much more fulfilling and happy life. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.